All right, y'all, I'm not reviewing this book in terms of its place in the canon of autism literature because I don't know anything about that. And I'm not reviewing its content from a medical or scholarly perspective. All I'm doing is saying what I thought was important and what happened to me when I read it. One thing I like to do is assign a color that I associate with the book because it helps me remember the cover and that helps me remember the contents. So we have this color, and I like to use kind of a headline to describe the lens that I was viewing it through as I read. So the headline for this book: Autism describes another kind of person that it is possible to be who is of equal value to other neurotypes. Those are my words, reminder, not the author's. Today's book, Uniquely Human by Barry Prizant and Tom Fields-Meyer. I have the revised and expanded edition. When they updated the book, they also updated this kit on the cover. So I have the second edition kit or something. Not to bury the lead, I'm very warm on this book. This is the first one that I read when I started to explore the possibility that I was one of these people too. Because I think really highly of this book, I want to address disagreements first because I don't want that to be the last note you hear. These differences aside, it is a valuable book. It is worth your time. It was worth mine twice all the way through. I was formally diagnosed when I was 36, and I knew with confidence for about 2 years before that. So the first 33, I was a person who needed to mask up and go do labor or else starve. Right? I had nothing. Most of my bio family had left by the age that I could work. So even as a child, I had to find my own way a lot of the time. And I knew at that age that I had things that I wanted to do. And even though it was very painful and confusing, I knew that I needed to try and find girls that would tolerate me being around them and people that wanted to play music with me. And I wanted to pursue an understanding of why things seemed to make so little sense to me. And I mention this because a lot of the people that this book focuses on are super privileged in terms of economic opportunity or family support or recognition or physical safety. So although I don't disagree with the contents of this book, I also find it to not be very relatable when describing these people's lives. When he describes their autism, these are clearly my people. But when the author is explaining that it's best for people who interact with autistics to demonstrate curiosity about what motivates their behaviors, there's a bit of analysis missing, in my opinion. That missing bit is this. The reason why some people are not curious is because their conception of autism involves an endless inner turmoil, the churning of which is responsible for the autistic person's behaviors. That explanation is erroneous because it confuses the neurological distress of an autistic person with an emotional claim of discomfort. Referring to self-regulating behaviors on page 29, if they succeed at eliminating these behaviors, what they're really doing is stripping the person of coping strategies and communicating that what the person is doing is offensive and wrong, possibly leading to low self-esteem, depression, and a sense of oneself as flawed and incompetent. Don't be my fucking manager. So when people don't think of asking why, they don't think of the cause of the stim, for example, as being correlated to anything external. And so the question appears resolved to them or not to exist at all. In my experience, these people, these are people who conceive of each thing they perceive as atomic in the literal sense. So every single thing they see is this discrete little item all on its own without possible interconnectedness. So it doesn't appear apparent to them why this question even ought to be asked because they don't conceive of the environment as affecting the subject in that way. So it doesn't even seem like the question of why doesn't even seem apparent to them. But people inside of that mindset can't really conceive of mindsets alternate to that one, so that might be how the author responds to that objection, is to say that it's not within his power to show these people a mind outside their own, which, yeah, that's true. And the author does stress how the environment affects autistic people, but he doesn't explicitly make this connection that necessarily precludes the search for motivations in this purely behaviorist way, where we assume that what preceded the behavior was an internal disposition and motivation to behave this way instrumentally to enjoy its social outcomes. So to summarize, you need to rethink how you think about behavior being motivated in order to accommodate autistic people. There are other possibilities besides the most brutal, and it's a common ableist idea to assume that an autistic, has an intellectual disability and so therefore to faultlessly apply the simplest behavioral model to them. But then you notice a drift too, where these judgments and assumptions are incorporated more and more, and the model stops being so basic And the power remains with the allistic person as the invalidation slowly removes more and more of the autistic's personhood. And it's this slow drip that results in this pure one-way street where commands are issued to the obeyer and any communication is not returned to the commander. In practice, this means something like don't treat anxiety as idiopathic and therefore to be ignored, find its source. Here's an example of this change in perspective. Every time I go to meet Dr. Butthead, I start yapping about The Simpsons. So I'm demonstrating my deficit in social reciprocity, am I not? Well, the other perspective is to say, Dr. Butthead has never once made me comfortable in his office. It's bright, he smells really strongly, there's tons of distracting noises, and the effect that those things would have on me is not allowed to be considered in this environment. It must be treated as external, right? He hasn't cared one time the effect that those things would have on me, and we're spinning our tires because he won't look at what we need him to see, and we need specifically him to see it because he's the one with the power. Page 17, instead of seeking to understand the person's perspective and experience, they simply try to manage the behavior. Don't treat their anxiety, for example, as idiopathic and therefore to be ignored. The other big point I wish he had addressed is the incoherence of the ableist criticism of autistic behaviors, because it so often involves an obvious contradiction where someone notices that you missed a social cue, and then they do a retaliatory behavior. But hang on, does that make sense? They notice you missed a social cue. Why is retaliation appropriate here? Wouldn't it make sense to only retaliate if the person didn't miss a social cue, but observed and ignored it? Not missed it, did not miss it, and chose to ignore it, to hurt you. From page 122, when autistic people display behavior that others may interpret as abrupt or rude, or when they simply seem oblivious, it is often because their neurological wiring makes it so difficult to weigh the many subliminal factors that help us read and react appropriately according to social expectations in social situations. So if someone misses a social cue, the assumption that it was done on purpose is clearly at odds with the person responding to you like you're socially different, right? They're demonstrating an awareness of your difference, or maybe they're demonstrating an awareness of your lack of awareness, while behaving like you're not different or unaware so they can justify punishing you, while also nominally maintaining that it's simply inexplicable to them why you would miss this cue. But this whole interaction is happening because they noticed you missed a social cue. Missed. Not ignored angrily to hurt you. Missed. So that's my criticism of the ableists. It's not just that we're dictating ableism is bad, and so if it's ableist, then it's bad, therefore. We're really saying that stance is fundamentally incoherent, and they should acknowledge that justifying any kind of behavior using that incoherence should be unacceptable in an equitable society, right? I'm expected to come to the table with some degree of honesty, but I have to sit there with people who jerk their knees and then claim, no, you didn't see that and it didn't happen, but if it did, it was actually your fault because you caused it and deserved it, but nah. All right, so that's complaints out of the way. One lukewarm take, there's this weird thing on the back of the book where it says teach telepathy. Don't. Teach society to accept multiple forms of communication and not justify abuse if you don't flawlessly, automatically, at first blush, know other people's methods. Reason I say this is because I don't feel telepathic with other people. Some musicians I have, for sure, when communicating musically. But often the issue I have in language is that I didn't feel a cue moment, right? So I understand the logic of the interaction. I understand the motivations in play, but what I never felt was the moment that an action was supposed to have happened. And that's possible to intellectualize, observe, identify, and respond to, but that's not what anyone around me is doing. And I don't think that's how I should approach this, because they're not affecting an extra mental process. And if I do that, I think I will be less like them. That's it, though. Let's celebrate the book. A couple really good things from the book. One great thing from the book, the trust chapter, number 4. The hell is that, a lawnmower? Really great things from the book. The trust chapter in this edition, it's 4. Those explanations of violations of trust are really important and true. And my experience is that because I couldn't justify why those were violations to the violators, they were just ignored. So seeing this external voice saying that you need to show these people respect, you need to show people like me respect, I have that highlighted and noted multiple times. And that includes, like, in order to show autistic people respect, that includes taking a look at your own behavior, even if you don't 100% think it makes sense to do so. That isn't an excuse to treat them in any other way than dignified. Another highlight is the Get It chapter, 7 in this edition. He's being clever here because he's playing to the tendency to over-intellectualize, which he's criticized elsewhere in the book, particularly in this Paul example. He's working, and in the course of his work, he asks this one aide, Paul, how he thinks about his work because he's really effective at helping the autistic person he supports. So page 148, he shrugged his shoulders, seeming almost baffled by my question. His answer is brief, I just pay attention. So obviously Paul is not doing what the author recommends here, but this is the speed that his holistic audience is moving at. So right after this story, he provides this big list of traits that can make you an effective interactor with autistic people. And its content is accurate, but it's really just saying over and over again, do you see this person as a person like you or a person unlike you? Are they like you in that their motivations are discernible, or are they unlike you in that the inner churning turmoil of autism's base state is responsible for everything you notice about them? Is this a person to you? Or is this like a medical curiosity and all the rules go out the window because you're essentially at the zoo? It's really mundane to ask. It is mundane to ask this, though, isn't it? Like, hey, are you sure you're treating them like people? But, like, let's imagine it as a film scene. Hey, make sure you're treating them like people, all right? Oh, but they're autistic. That's right. Autistic people. Oh. It's barely saying anything. That kind of elementary observation is at odds with these people's beliefs as expressed through their behavior. But overall, that is correct and true. The people who get it meet other people as individuals, respect them as individuals, and transact with an attitude of wanting to understand. And the people who don't get it meet other people as instantiations of a larger collective, disrespect them as individuals, and transact with an attitude of domination. One last note very quickly on the idea of interdependence versus dependence. This is something that's introduced during one of the personal stories at the end, but it's an important idea. I'll keep this section short. If you're really, really ignorant politically, you think you're super independent. I rent an apartment. Case closed. I do not grow my own food. Coffin nailed. I do not collect or clean my own water. Horse corpse thwacked. So recognizing a degree of interdependence is an important part of seeing yourself as a member of a community, and community is necessary for autistics struggling to get their needs met in an holistic world. All told, good book. Helped me see myself as a person who needed to be respected in the same way as everyone else. I had really extensive long-term problems with my bio family that changed how I saw myself in the world, and that affected me for a really long time and still do. The way that they treated me made me feel like I was a worthless kind of person, and when I told them that behavior hurt me, it didn't stop. But I started to think that what they were saying were contrivances to justify mistreating me. And this was the first book I read that suggested the possibility that I shouldn't be mistreated for who I am. Buy it if you have a cool bookstore. Amazon can eat